Hello and welcome to Common Ground, an inside look at Suffolk County. I'm your host, Sheriff Steve Tompkins. Now today, as we continue our gubernatorial race for the office, we have today with us Mr. Joe Avellone, who's going to be here, and he's going to talk to us about, one, why he's running for governor, what he brings to the office, and really how he's going to get his arms around making sure that you as citizens of the Commonwealth can really understand that we need to work together as a community to make everything go forward the way that we need it to go forward. And so, Joe, without any further ado, sir.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank
Great
you so much
here,
for coming on. And what I forgot to tell you folks is, I believe when they first began the race for the office, Joe was one of the first of the candidates to call. And so I know Joe pretty well. We spent a lot of time together talking, and he's a very, very insightful guy and really stands on the issues that are of importance. So let's start with that, Joe. Okay. Talk to us about your strength right now. I mean, you have a number of strengths, but healthcare is your background. Talk to us about healthcare and what you think the Commonwealth needs to make sure that all of its citizens are taken care of.
Oh, sure, Steve. You're right. I've had a long career in healthcare. Started out as a surgeon at Brigham and Women's Hospital, not too far from here, after having gone to Harvard Medical School here. So I have had practice surgery for a while, but then really have been a manager and a leader in our health system for the past 30 years. I was the Chief Operating Officer of Blue Cross and Blue Shield during the 90s when we actually controlled our healthcare costs and put in place some important preventive care measures. Right. And for the last 10 or 15 years, I've actually been in a different part of healthcare, helping to develop new drugs, and in particular to have that happen quicker so they could get to patients and doctors earlier. So I've really seen all sides of it. But with regard to your question, I think the most important thing is to make sure we keep it affordable for everybody. I think we have a wonderful system in Massachusetts. We know we have some of the finest healthcare institutions, some of the finest doctors, but we also have the highest healthcare costs in the world per person basis, higher than any other state and certainly higher than any other country. So I think our challenge is to keep what's great about medicine here and healthcare for everybody here, make sure everybody has access to it, but then make sure we keep it affordable. I think everybody does have access to it pretty much, in that the system we've had here for 7 years now is set up so that everybody can be insured, and I think that's an important thing. That's a value, and we need to hang on to that. So to the degree that anybody is not insured at this point, they really should sign up with Mass Health or sign up with a private insurance company. But we really should have everybody insured. I think that's the promise of Massachusetts. Keeping it affordable is another issue. And I think we have to work hard on how we actually deliver care here. And the next governor is going to have to be involved with this. And that has to do with doctors working more in teams when they take care of people, and then moving how we pay for their services differently. So move away from what's called fee-for-service payment, where we're paying the doctors and the hospitals for everything they do, so quantity, and instead pay them more on the quality of the overall outcome of the patients. If we can get doctors to operate in teams, and if we can move away from this fee-for-service system, we can keep healthcare affordable. So
as governor, how do you embrace that challenge, and how do you change that dynamic so that it can go along the route that you just talked about?
Well, actually, Governor Patrick passed a law a couple of years ago. It's called Chapter 224, and it really sets the framework for doing this. So we now collect a lot of data. We see what the patterns of care are between doctors and hospitals, and which institutions and their doctors perform more efficiently versus others. And having all that data, that allows us to then call for certain institutions to change how they're operating to come in line with the targets that the law prescribes. So we have the framework there to do it. It really takes leadership in the governor's office, someone that's worked with all these other major institutions around the state, as I have when I was the COO of Blue Cross, in order to make that happen. So I'm very confident we can get there, but it is going to take leadership at the level of the governor, because this will be a huge issue for us. Right now, in addition to it being expensive for our families and our businesses, it's 40% of the state budget. So our ability to invest in new things, education, and some of the things we'll probably talk about, really is dependent on getting control of our healthcare costs. And then I just add one other thing. It's also the biggest budget buster in our cities and towns. Everybody that has been in the public sector dealing with municipalities knows that this is the biggest cost there. So controlling our healthcare costs is going to mean everything for the state budget, our city budgets, and certainly for our businesses and our families.
Talk to me about Obamacare and where you come down on that.
It's a great question. I think the first thing to note is that we do have a system where everybody is insured in our state, virtually everybody. There's still a small fraction of people that still should enroll. That's the outcome that Obamacare is looking for. So we have a system, we've had it for 7 years. A lot of the principles actually went into Obamacare. And I think what we should do is keep the system we've got. And I've said that we should petition for a waiver from Obamacare because we've already got the outcome. We already have what Obamacare is trying to do, which is to have everybody insured. So to take new insurance rules or new approaches and put them on top of the system we've already had doesn't get us anything because we already have the outcome. Where we should spend our time is to keep it affordable now, which has more to do with how do doctors and hospitals work with each other. And that's where our focus ought to be. And ultimately, the rest of the nation will have to do that as well. But I think it's important that we don't complicate the system we've already got and put all the politics around that in an upheaval again. And that's why I would push for a permanent exemption. Governor Patrick has asked for an exemption himself and got a temporary one. And I think that was because when they were first rolling this out at the federal level, I think they wanted to make sure they got it into all the states, so they were probably not very anxious to have people having exemptions. But I think ultimately it's always going to be a little different as it rolls out in lots of these states. And I think we've already got everybody sure we should keep the system we've got here.
Education.
Education is a huge issue, not only just for people's lives, but it is how we make our way in the world in Massachusetts. I mean, so I think there are two critical elements. First is how to create new jobs and bring new jobs to the Commonwealth, and how to even create more mainstream jobs. A lot of that is education. And that means making sure that our education systems, and let's just talk about the higher education system, so our community colleges and our state colleges, understand the new work skills that are necessary to bring new jobs here. Because this is our biggest issue, bringing lots of new jobs to the Commonwealth. I've been running a large global business. I understand that that companies will go where the job skills are, and that'll be true of Massachusetts. So making sure that our community colleges, our state colleges, have the right work skills in the curriculum so that all these kids that graduate have the right skills, then I know we can bring a lot of new businesses here. So that's the first piece about education. The second is our K through 12 system.
Right.
These are our children, this is our future.
Right.
And we know generally we have a good public school system at the highest level in our state, but the achievement gap between the good schools and the poor ones is too big, and one of the biggest achievement gaps in the country. So my highest priority is to close that achievement gap.
How?
And obviously, if it was easy, we would have done it. I recognize that. But I think it's by having the state have it as a high priority, so it's my highest priority. I'm going to create a special fund that's going to be targeted at zeroing in on those schools which are at risk of failing or failing. And for those schools, as our highest priority, I'm going to do the things that we know work. So the first thing is pre-K education. We know that works. We know that if a child can read, is literate at the 3rd grade, that they have a much, much higher chance of finishing school, even going on, but certainly getting a good job, a good paying job that they could support a family on. So pre-K we know works, lengthening the school day we know works, and making sure that the lengthened day is used for enrichment programs. And then I have a third dimension, which is a special fund for those schools to deal with the other issues in their community that we know is holding kids back. So it might be multiple languages, could be nutrition issues, so it's flexible to deal with that school. So I think if we take a special fund, if we focus it on the at-risk schools, we do the things that we know work, we can make a difference, and we would make a difference. I expect that we would do that.
So when you talk about structural change along the lines of lengthening the school day,
yes.
Talk to us about how you would negotiate this with the teachers union.
Well, frankly, I think if the teachers are going to do extra work, they should be paid for it. So I don't think I'm going to be asking them to do something, or that this program would, where they're going to have to not be paid. I do think that I'm not talking about a lot more classroom time. I'm talking about remaking the school day that builds in enrichment programs and academic support, that uses mentors, even uses some connections to the private sector to have people more involved in the schools to show how career paths can be developed or professions can be developed. So I do believe that it will cost more money because we should pay the teachers for some extra time, but it isn't a quick calculation about X hours more means that many more teacher hours. I'm going to pay for this by lowering our healthcare costs. I said it's 40% of the state budget. If it's 39% of the state budget, it's $350 million a year. that more than pays for a lot more than what I just talked about, which is targeting these at-risk schools. So it'll cost money, but if we control our healthcare costs and just take the waste out of the system in healthcare, we can definitely make these kinds of investments. And I think that's what we need for our kids. Right now, in too many of these schools, these kids don't finish, they drop out, or even if they do, they really can't hold down a job in today's economy. That's not fair. We have to do better than that with these kids.
How do you feel about charter schools?
Obviously a big issue.
Huge.
And I think charter schools have a role in our public school system, but that's it. It's a role in our public school system. I think the key is to protect and improve our public school system. So the role for charter schools, in my mind, is to be the innovation centers. And that means two things. It means that we should have them, of course, and that we should make sure that the learnings are transferable to the public school system, and it happens. So that means they need to enroll populations that are similar, and that the learnings can be transferable. I don't think we should be trying to create another separate school system just for the sake of having another school system. I think we need to have charter schools only to support the learnings that we can then extend to the larger public school system. The public school system is the bedrock of our society and of our democracy, frankly. That's what we have to protect. The question would be, do I approve of raising the cap? And I think, yeah, I do approve modestly of raising the cap. But once again, it's within the constraints of making sure that our charter schools are there to help us learn how to do the public school system generally better.
You mentioned community colleges, and there's a lot of discussion around community colleges and being training institutions to steer folks into the trades and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Where do you come down on vocational education? Are you a fan of voc ed?
Oh boy, I'm glad you asked that question, because the other part of my K through 12 plan, in addition to closing that achievement gap, is to make sure that everybody is career or college ready coming out of school, out of high school, and that includes vocational education. So I'm calling for a large expansion of vocational education back into the curriculums of our traditional schools. I think the regional vocational schools, we have some great ones. You know, it varies. Some are fantastic. The one in Worcester is really a model for the nation. But it's not enough. Given the opportunity there for young people, I think we need to bring it back into the curriculum. We've gotten away from it over the last 20 years. I think it's wrong, and this is an opportunity to bring it back and make sure we bring it in a way that it matches up well with the newer kinds of industries. So, you know, auto repair today is a lot different than auto repair 15 years ago. And so I think we have to make sure that, and here's why. Half of the so-called STEM jobs in the state, jobs that require some kind of science or technology, half of them don't require an education beyond high school. So that means good vocational education training. Those are $68,000 a year jobs. Those are great middle-class jobs, and I think they would be available to our young people if we had more vocational education in the schools.
So, two-part question on jobs. How would you attract more businesses to the Commonwealth to set up shop here? And then the second part of that question is, how would you keep the businesses that are already here so that they don't flee and go across our borders? So let's start with, how would you attract new businesses?
Well, I have a large experience in this. I've been creating jobs for 30 years, literally, in my career. And in the last 7 years, as I said, I've been running a large global division of a medical research firm. It's based in Waltham, so it's a public company based here. We have 15,000 employees in 50 countries, and we have about 3,000 in Massachusetts. We're the largest, second largest life sciences company in Massachusetts. What I've learned from that is the importance of the work skills. And if we have the work skills, companies in these new industries will come here. In our own company, university systems reach out to us and try and learn these new industries, in our case, our new industry, and then build it into their curriculum. Then we have internships and we hire people in. So we have that relationship in Germany, we have it in Singapore, we have it in Japan. That's what Massachusetts needs to do to attract these new industries now. And so in our case, we developed our own relationship with Salem State, because right here in one of the life sciences capitals of the world, we didn't have enough of a certain kind of training for our employees to manage what are called clinical trials. Really requires almost a community college certificate program training. But we needed to build that relationship with Salem State. They put it in their curriculum. We now hire those graduates into our company. This is what the state needs to do in a much more strategic, proactive way, so that in a more centralized way, we're understanding the new industries, we're figuring where we can put the skills into the curriculum, where in the geography in the state, so we can bring jobs to many parts of our state. And that's what I think we're not doing near enough. Right now we have a wonderful system, 29 schools, but it's hit or miss as to how it operates. Many of those community colleges in particular are kind of focused on their local market and not really thinking about these newer industries. So I think this is what we need to do as a state going forward.
And how do we keep existing businesses?
How to keep them here. I don't think the answer is tax breaks. So let me just say that right now, because people often ask. I think that's been a failure. We give these big tax breaks to these big companies, and you know, Fidelity just being the latest that left from Marlboro and went to New Hampshire, but that's happened time and time and time again. I don't think I think companies have way too many competing demands that they're going to make their decision on, and the state's tax rate is like the 6th thing down on the list. And so I don't think we can count on them on the basis of a tax break. I do think if we have the right kind of skilled workforce here, they'll be here. And that means precision manufacturing, smart manufacturing, the kinds of life sciences I've just been talking about, and many other industries. This is the wave of the future for us. This is what we're going to build all the new jobs on. But I think if we have the talented workforce, we'll have it. And right now, in our state, there are about 100,000 jobs that are not filled because of skill set mismatch right now. So I think that's an indication that even the businesses that are here could expand here if we had, if we were doing a better job at this. You know, I think we have paid a lot of attention to our, we have all these wonderful private universities, but they're not the people that stay and work in our Commonwealth necessarily. It's the people that go to their state universities, their state colleges. That's where we need to invest, and those are the folks that are going to stay here and work in our Commonwealth and build the future with us.
Public safety, clearly something that's near and dear to my heart.
Absolutely, yeah.
Where do you come down on public safety?
Well, there's a lot of dimensions to it, but the dimension I've really focused on has been youth violence, just the tragedy of youth violence. I mean, I saw it first as a surgeon 30 years ago, even as a young resident here, just the senseless, tragic loss of young lives. And we've had a lot of ups and downs since then, but a big upswing, again, here, throughout the Commonwealth, but certainly in Boston in the last few years. So I've spent a lot of time trying to understand it, talking to you, talking to some of your colleagues in the government, Tito Jackson and others, and I think what's clear to me is we need to put back some of the things that worked before that aren't there anymore. And I know that's part of it. We did have a wonderful program in the 1990s that really brought down youth violence in particular, and crime overall. Then the program ended. We went through the first part of the decade of the 2000s, and everything drifted up, and then we got into this recession and cut back funding on things, and now we have really an escalation again. Right. So I think what we need to do as local aid comes back up, and it needs to for cities like Boston, but around the state, we need to put back programming for some of the gang diversion programs that we know worked, things like ROCA in Chelsea or UTEC in Lowell. We definitely need to put back, I think, summer jobs. I think summer jobs makes a huge difference, and Tim McCarthy, who's a city councilor, makes a big point of that, and I think he's had some good experience with that, and I definitely would favor that. Community policing, I think we need to have policemen that are in the neighborhoods that know people in the neighborhoods better, and people know them. So we know that worked in the past. I think that has to go back. And then finally, in your world, I think reentry programs, and I know you've been terrific on developing the reentry programs in the Suffolk County system, and I've certainly learned from that and seen some others. And I think this is a big part of preparing people who do end up incarcerated so that they have a life when they get out and have alternatives to the lives that they led before. So
85% of the population in my facility is there because of some involvement with drugs. 42% have presented with some form of mental illness. 95% of my population lives within 5 miles of our facility, so they can walk home on a good day. I'm curious as to where you come down on the need for more beds for detox and mental health programs versus sending these folks to a correction facility.
Well, I'm calling for radical change. I think we've sort of backed our way into a system that is doing it all wrong, despite a lot of good, well-meaning people. So I've called for an Office of Recovery at the Governor's office. I've been hearing and seeing addiction all across the Commonwealth the whole time I've been running. Obviously, it's in the big cities, but it's also in lots of smaller communities, and it's tragic, and it's a healthcare crisis. And so Right now, what happens is just what you said. A lot of people who often are addicted or perhaps have mental illness, but often addicted in a high measure, ends up in the county jail.
Right.
Not really set up for that. I think you know, treatment does occur, but it's not really the ongoing treatment that ultimately is going to be necessary. And then these young people often are back on the street, back into their addiction, and we haven't served them well, and it's cost a fortune. I'm going to flip it on its head. We definitely need more capacity in the system, and that means we need to reimburse the providers better and even build some more public at all levels. So it's at detox, it's at rehab, it's at sober houses, the whole continuum. We definitely need to change the insurance rules. The insurance rules create more obstacles, and they interrupt the continuum of care. People get into detox, but then they have to get a new authorization for rehab that fall through the cracks. These young people then get back into an addiction cycle. We definitely need probably to double drug courts. We have about 21. We need one in every major jurisdiction, and I think the estimate is maybe 50. And I think that does start to deal with getting people away from the criminal justice system that are heading that way and into treatment. But I am also going to not only do those things, but I'm going to be more aggressive. As the governor, I think I'm going to lead our region to pulling together to push on the FDA. I think the FDA is being irresponsible in approving drugs like Zohydro, a new powerful oral narcotic, that are so powerfully addictive, so easily diverted, so easy to end up being in the hands of young people who then quickly get addicted and then on to heroin, that they've got to take more responsibility. And I think as a region, with our whole congressional delegation and 6 governors, I think we can push on that. And then finally, we have to stop we have to do our best as a region to slow down at least the heroin smuggling that is really flooding our cities and towns. So there's a lot to do. It has to be done essentially much differently, and a lot of it isn't going to cost a lot more money. I mean, at $46,000 a year in the sheriff's facility.
To incarcerate.
Yeah, to incarcerate. You could take a lot of that money and spend it on treatment and create all this new capacity I just talked about, and all you're doing is moving money around that's already in the public budgets. And I think that's what we need to do, but it's going to take leadership at the governor's level to do it. I'm completely dedicated to doing this. I've seen this now as a public health crisis of huge proportions.
Right.
And just actually today published an op-ed piece in the podium part of the Globe, the Boston Globe Online, with Steve Tolman, the head of the AFL-CIO. He and I are like-minded on this, and we've published this, which kind of outlines what I just talked about. The other thing that has to happen is we have to change the stigma of this. People still view this as a moral failing or something that we shouldn't talk about. It's an illness. It's an illness like any other illness, and it needs to be treated that way, and it would be in my administration.
Unfortunately, we only have about 30, 40 seconds left, but I want to ask you, what do you think about casinos in the Commonwealth, and do you think that they are, should they be here or should they not?
I'm not a fan of casinos. I think they overpromise and underdeliver, and the costs of having them are high, addiction services being one, but the cost of small businesses in the area. But I do think we have a law. The law does allow for local determination, and I think we should let the law play out. And I think that's what's happening. You know, many communities are turning it down, and it may be that one or other will decide that they want to have it. But I think we should. I think the law was carefully crafted for careful evaluation and local determination. We should let that go forward.
Listen, Joe, it's been a blast having you here. We have 5, 6, 7 months to go. I mean, it's quite a road to hoe, and so we'd love to have you back as we get into the dog days of summer, just to check in and see how everything is going. But we wish you great luck,
Thank you, Steve.
going forward. And it's been a pleasure having you on the show.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.